problem is that any debate that they would have, let's say the Democrats said, yes, we're going to have a debate. Come on, Marianne and RFK, let's all get together and have a debate. Do you think it's going to be fair? Do you think they're not going to set Joe up to be on top? Do you think that it's going to be run in any way, shape, or form other than to make Joe look good?
Well, that may be true, but that was the same thing that happened with Bernie and Hillary, and Bernie still figured out a way to nail her ass to the wall more often than not. And the same was true. Now,
Bernie is Bernie.
Bernie is Bernie, but in 2020, Bernie did not take the gloves off against Joe the way he did against Hillary. And a lot of that, unfortunately, has to do with the fact that he is a lifer politician on Capitol Hill with very few friends, and Joe happens to be one of them.
I don't.
Let's hear what Symone Sanders has to say about a primary challenge.
Bobby Kennedy Jr., doing well. He's at 19%. Hasn't really gotten that much out there. I mean, and I'm starting to hear more and more talk about him. Are we going to actually have a challenge here?
I'm trying not to laugh, Joe. There's not going to be.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yes.
Do you know how many people said the same thing about Donald Trump in 2015 on this show?
Except
said
I will
the
note,
same exact thing.
Yes, because there was going to be a Republican primary. But I really think that the mealy-mouthed Democrats, as I like to call them, and some of my progressive friends who would like to live in a fantasy land, they need to come back to reality. Yeah. And the reality is this. The sitting president of the United States of America is a Democrat that would like to run for re-election, so much so that he has declared a re-election campaign. Right. In that case, the Democratic National Committee will not facilitate a primary process. There will be no debate stage for Bobby Kennedy, Marianne Williamson, or anyone else to stand on.
So we're going to have another Bobby Kennedy in an empty chair in the debate, right?
There will be no debate.
Yeah, no debate.
The Democratic National Committee administers the debates, and they're not going to set up a primary process for debates for someone to challenge the head of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I can't even. But here's the thing. She's not wrong. And I would like to know historically, when have there been primary challenges to sitting presidents in there? And when has the party, I'm just curious, in past years, when has that happened?
I'm surprised that you're even, no, it's not a question of the party allowing it to happen. It's a question of whether or not democracy is allowed to rule the day.
Not in a private club.
But you're wrong.
I'm not. That's why they have super delegates.
I'll tell you why you're right. No, once again, you're wrong. And I'll explain to you why you're wrong.
I don't
totally
think so.
Wrong. No, you're wrong.
I'm pretty sure I know what legally a private club means and what they're entitled to do.
I understand that, but you're still wrong. And I'll explain why. Because in 1968, there was a challenge to LBJ, even though he fully intended to run for re-election and was in it for the first two primary contests. But when it became obvious that either Eugene McCarthy or more specifically Bobby Kennedy was likely to win the nomination, he wouldn't even face it. He dropped out. Now, of course, this was on the backdrop of the Vietnam War, which by 1968, overwhelmingly, the country was like, get the F out of the South Pacific. And of course, we wouldn't do it because the military-industrial complex had already taken over.
But you just basically proved my point. There hasn't been where the party has allowed for there to be a challenge.
No, they tried to not have a challenge, but they did it anyway.
But then what happened?
Ultimately, Nixon won, but that's because the Democratic establishment.
And every time there's been one, the other side wins.
Bobby Kennedy gets assassinated. He would have beat Nixon in 68.
All I'm saying, could have, would have, should have. Every time that there is a primary challenger to an incumbent president, the other party wins. So the truth is, Joe was right. He was very prophetic.
No,
he will be a one-term president.
Once again, I am not done, and you will not let me finish.
Because you're not understanding what I'm saying, and you're arguing against the point that I'm not making.
May I continue?
Sure.
So then you had Ted Kennedy, another Kennedy, challenge Jimmy Carter in 1980. And that was an extremely close race that Jimmy ended up winning by, I think, 10 points or so. It was very close. Then you had Pat Buchanan challenging George H.W. Bush in 1992.
Did they host debates on that in the primary?
I believe.
Did they host debates with the sitting president?
I'm not 100% sure. But
that's the question I'm asking you. That's what I keep asking you. In what historical context has a party who runs their own debates allowed for a primary challenge to a sitting president and hosted debates? When has that happened?
I'd have to check to see if the debates actually took place, but there was a legitimate primary.
There's going to be a primary. They're going to qualify Symone Sanders.
But that's not what she's saying.
But she's not the boss.
I understand she's not the boss, but she's saying the quiet part out loud, which is we are going to do everything in our capacity to basically subvert the democratic process.
I understand that. And again, they are having a primary. It illegally will happen. She is not the boss of that. People qualify. They're in the primary. That's how it goes. This is a private club. They're choosing to not host debates for a challenger. That's always been the case. I don't understand why this is news.
Well, now let me explain.
Because you still haven't told me how I'm wrong about that.
So you are wrong, and you are dead wrong, because again, throughout history, when does a legitimate primary take place against a sitting president? It's only happened a handful of times, but when does it happen? It happens when an incumbent president is extremely unpopular and extremely weak. And if you look at LBJ on the backdrop of the Vietnam War, when you look at Jimmy Carter as a whole, when you look at George H.W. Bush post the Gulf War, and now when you look at Joe Biden, what do you have? You have extremely weak and vulnerable incumbent presidents who ultimately went on to lose in spite of the fact that they were challenged in a primary. Now, what is indisputable over the course of what happens during these primaries is that the party establishment will deliberately manipulate the process to protect the incumbent, even if it means that will seal their fate in the general election, which will happen in 24.
Well, I think that happens regardless of what they do.
But in this case, mark my words, Trump or DeSantis is the next president. And the reason I know this to be a fact is because the Democratic Party is showing you right now that this is just the tip of the iceberg of how far they're willing to go to literally screw this thing.
Okay, still don't see how I'm wrong in what I said to you.
The reason you're wrong is because their perspective is to say, yeah, we know he's unpopular. We know that people want to challenge him. We know that the likelihood that the GOP
Guys, am
wins.
I crazy? All I'm saying, the one statement I made that he keeps, I don't understand, is that the Democratic Party is under no obligation to host debates.
I didn't say they were.
Okay, and I've asked you, when has that happened? And then I said to you, there still is a primary, and you keep telling me I'm wrong, and I don't understand what it is you're telling me I'm wrong about.
What I'm saying is that
Why am I wrong?
Because even if you don't agree with either one of the two candidates that are challenging him, they have every right to hold an actual primary. What I'm saying,
they are holding a primary.
I don't agree. I will tell. Here's the difference. Once again, we will disagree on this. They are going to do everything in their power to shut down the primaries.
Yeah.
They are going to have no faith voting in these primary states. They are going to say, by default, we are with the president of the United States, even if he can't open his eyes.
Yes, that's what they do every time.
Now, this is where
that's the Democratic Party.
The Democratic Party, but this is actually a good thing. I think in a way, this further proves that if you think that the Democratic Party is better than the Republican Party, you're nuts.
Well, and again, I'm going to go back to my original point, which I really do think is the ultimate thing here, is it really doesn't matter. They can't win anyway. They could have a primary. They could not have a primary. They could have a debate. They could have Marianne. They could have RFK. They could have a friggin' Congo line of candidates. They could spend money in the world to have big fancy debate parties. They could do all of that. They're still going to lose. Or they could do none of it and they're still going to lose. And so I do agree, like, to me, every year when I watch all the ridiculous nonsense, first of all, they don't ever have legitimate primaries. It's always a farce. Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.